Before we start, if you enjoy the story, please leave a like and check if you're subscribed. The restraints left marks in her cyan fur. Jacob Steele watched from the back of the crowd as two human guards dragged the Valari scout across Threshold Station's central plaza, her digitigrade legs moving with forced coordination, her ears pinned flat against her skull. The crowd pressed close, their breathing synchronized with anticipation, their faces reflecting the harsh overhead lighting that turned the execution platform into a stage. Ambassador Corvin Resch stood at the platform's edge, his voice amplified across the plaza. Shira of the Northern Range sabotaged mining station Delta 7, he said, each word measured for maximum political impact. 17 human workers died in the collapse. Today we demonstrate that interspecies law applies equally to all. Jacob's fingers tightened around the datapad in his pocket. He'd reviewed the case files 3 times last night, unable to sleep, and something fundamental didn't align. The sabotage patterns required engineering knowledge Valari scouts didn't possess. The timeline placed Shira on the opposite side of the station during the critical window. The evidence felt constructed rather than discovered. On the platform, Shira lifted her head. Her amber eyes swept across the crowd with sharp awareness rather than submission. Her tail remained rigid behind her, held straight rather than tucked between her legs. Even restrained and moments from death, she carried herself with dignity that contradicted the narrative of guilty desperation. Jacob had spent 6 years in diplomatic corps security, learning to read body language across species barriers. Fear manifested differently in Valari physiology. Hackles raised, ears swiveling frantically, tail wrapped tight against the body. Shira showed none of these markers. Instead, her posture suggested calculation, as though she were still gathering intelligence even now. The executioner activated the plasma rifle, its charging coil building to lethal intensity with a rising whine that silenced the crowd's murmurs. Jacob moved before conscious thought completed the decision. His hand found the emergency panel built into every plaza wall, meant for catastrophic pressure failures or fire suppression. He triggered the evacuation protocol. Alarms shrieked across every speaker. Emergency lighting flooded the space in strobing red. The crowd fragmented instantly, bodies pushing toward exit corridors as automated voice warnings announced immediate evacuation required. Jakob ran. His security training mapped the fastest route through panicking civilians, his shoulders turning to slip between bodies, his boots finding purchase on the deck plating. The guards surrounding the platform hesitated, caught between maintaining position and responding to the emergency, and in that moment of confusion, Jacob reached the platform stairs. The executioner fired. Jacob threw himself forward, his armored body colliding with Shira's smaller frame, his weight driving them both sideways as the plasma bolt seared across his left shoulder. The impact burned through the armor's outer layer, the pain immediate and blinding, but his momentum carried them off the platform's far edge into the surging crowd below. They hit the deck hard. Jacob rolled, keeping his body between Shira and the platform, his vision tunneling at the edges from pain and adrenaline. Her fur pressed against his chest armor, surprisingly soft despite its wild appearance, and her scent filled his nose, something like pine and clean earth. She made a sound between a whine and a growl, her body tensing beneath his. "Move," Jacob said, forcing himself upright despite his shoulder-screaming protest. "Maintenance corridor, 20 meters northeast." Shira's ears swiveled toward his voice, her amber eyes fixed on him with disturbing intensity, pupils dilated wide, and for a long moment she remained frozen in a crouch position. "Why?" The word emerged in accented standard, her vocal structure giving it a growling undertone. "Later, move now." Something in his tone must have translated across their species barrier. Shira surged to her feet with fluid grace, her digitigrade legs providing explosive acceleration. Jacob ran beside her, his longer stride compensating for her greater agility, and the crowd parted around them as more evacuation warnings echoed through the plaza. The maintenance corridor entrance appeared ahead, its access panel still showing green clearance. Jacob's security credentials remained active for another 15 seconds before the system registered his defection. He pressed his palm to the scanner, and the door cycled open with a hydraulic hiss. They plunged into the narrow corridor beyond. The door sealed behind them, cutting off the plaza's chaos, and the sudden quiet felt oppressive after the alarm cacophony. Emergency lighting cast everything in amber shadows. Jacob stumbled against the corridor wall, his injured shoulder finally demanding acknowledgement. The burn had penetrated deeper than he'd initially registered, nerve damage making his left arm nearly useless. Shira stood 3 meters away, her back against the opposite wall, her chest heaving with rapid breaths. Her ears remained pinned flat, and her tail lashed behind her in agitated sweeps. She watched him with predatory focus, her nostrils flaring as she processed his scent. "You're injured," she said, her accent making the words sound like an accusation. "I'll live." Jacob accessed his armor's medical kit with his functional hand, pulling out burn gel and bandaging. "We have maybe 10 minutes before security traces the evacuation trigger to my credentials." "You intervened." "Yes." "You accepted injury." "Yes." "Why?" She pushed away from the wall, taking one step closer, then another, her movements cautious but deliberate. "You are human. I am Valari. We are not pack. There is no bond between us, no obligation, no kinship structure. Why would you sacrifice yourself for one who is not yours?" Jacob met her eyes while applying the burn gel to his shoulder, the medication numbing the worst of the pain. "Because killing you was wrong," he said simply. Shira's ears flicked forward, then back, then forward again. Her tail stilled mid-sweep. She made a sound deep in her chest that Jacob couldn't interpret. "You believe I am innocent." "Did you sabotage that mine?" "No." The word came instantly. No hesitation, no calculation. "I was investigating weapons smuggling, restricted human military technology flowing to Valari separatist packs through that mining operation. When I arrived, the facility was already destroyed, 17 workers already dead. I attempted to access their data systems to determine cause when security forces arrested me." Jacob's fingers moved across his datapad, accessing files he shouldn't touch, using clearances that would be revoked any second. "The mine executive," he said, reading rapidly, "Marcus Yang, 3 separate intelligence flags for unauthorized weapons transactions, under investigation by Internal Affairs before the collapse. The sabotage destroyed all physical evidence of the smuggling operation. They needed someone blamed before my investigation exposed the conspiracy. And a dead Valari scout can't testify about what she found." The alarm suddenly changed pitch, shifting from evacuation warnings to a new frequency that made Jacob's blood freeze. The automated voice spoke with mechanical urgency. "Biological containment breach in Sector 7 Delta. Lethal organism at large. All personnel initiate lockdown protocols immediately." Shira's ears swiveled toward the corridor junction ahead. Her nostrils flared and her hackles rose visibly along her spine. "Something approaches," she whispered. "Fast, wrong scent, not human, not Valari." Jacob pulled up the security feeds on his datapad, accessing cameras throughout the lower sectors. The screens showed carnage, bodies torn apart with savage efficiency, and moving through the corridors with terrible purpose, a creature from nightmares, black biomechanical form, elongated head, eyeless face, moving with speed that shouldn't be possible for something that size. "Xenomorph," Jacob breathed. "The bioweapons lab. They were holding one in containment. The evacuation chaos must have—" The creature appeared on the camera feed showing their corridor. 3 junctions away and closing. Jacob said. They ran. The maintenance corridors became a blur of turns and access hatches, Jacob's security knowledge guiding them toward the emergency docking bays, while behind them the creature's approach registered through vibrations in the deck plating. Shira moved with preternatural grace, her body designed for this kind of flight, and Jacob pushed his injured body to keep pace. Security forces breached their corridor from the opposite direction, weapons raised, and for one frozen second, Jacob thought they'd coordinate against the common threat. Then the xenomorph arrived. The creature moved like liquid death, its inner jaw extending to punch through a guard's faceplate, its clawed hands tearing through armor as though it were paper. Acid blood sprayed from a glancing shot, eating through the deck plating with a hissing sound. Jacob grabbed Shira's arm and pulled her toward an emergency airlock. His credentials were finally failing, access panels rejecting his palm, but the chaos had triggered override protocols. The airlock cycled open. A maintenance skiff sat in the cramped bay, designed for exterior hull repairs. Jacob initiated the launch sequence while Shira sealed the airlock behind them, and through the small viewport, they watched the xenomorph tear through the remaining security forces. The skiff launched with bone-rattling force, magnetic clamps releasing them into the black vacuum beyond Threshold Station's hull. Behind them, the station's lights flickered as emergency lockdowns sealed section after section. Jacob set course for the nearest asteroid belt, anywhere with cover, anywhere they could disappear, while both governments mobilized hunting parties. In the skiff's cramped interior, Shira sat pressed against the opposite bulkhead, her tail wrapped tight around her legs, her ears swiveling constantly as she processed everything that had happened. Finally she spoke. "You destroyed your career, your standing, your position within your people's hierarchy. For me, a stranger, not Pack." Jacob adjusted their trajectory, his shoulder throbbing despite the medication. "Yes," he said quietly. "Why?" He looked at her then, really looked at her. The confusion in her amber eyes, the tension in every line of her body, the way her entire worldview was attempting to reconfigure around an action her culture had never prepared her to understand. "Because killing you was wrong," he repeated. Shira's ears drooped slightly, her tail uncurled, then wrapped tight again. She made that sound in her chest once more, somewhere between a whine and something that might have been wonder. Behind them, Threshold Station receded into the distance, growing smaller against the starfield, and ahead lay the contested territories where laws meant nothing and survival depended on adaptation. Jacob's datapad chimed with alerts, arrest warrants, kill orders, bounties from both governments. They were fugitives now. Both of them. And Shira still couldn't understand why he'd chosen this path, because trust beyond Pack bonds simply didn't exist in her universe. Not yet. The salvage depot drifted in the asteroid belt, like a mechanical tumor, all mismatched hull sections and jury-rigged life support. Jacob traded his security credentials to a black market dealer named Roth, a thin man with calculating eyes, and received false identification chips, supplies, and shelter in the maintenance levels, where environmental systems cycled unpredictably between freezing and sweltering. Shira watched Jacob negotiate with focused intensity, her ears tracking every vocal shift, her tail held rigidly still. When Roth named an inflated price, Jacob leaned back and laughed, offering half while accessing his datapad with casual confidence. The dealer accepted. In their maintenance tunnel refuge, Shira crouched against the bulkhead with her tail wrapped around her legs. "You lied," she said, her accent making the word harsh. "You had no other buyers. Humans expect some deception in negotiations." Jakob arranged their supplies with methodical efficiency. "I gave him confidence instead of desperation." Valari do not lie within pack structures. Trust depends on honest communication. We're not in a pack structure. We're surrounded by criminals, and survival here requires flexibility. Shira's ears flattened. Deception is flexibility? Sometimes. Over 4 days, Jacob taught her techniques that made her visibly uncomfortable. How to still her tail when nervous, how to control her ear positions, how to speak with casual inflection rather than pack formal cadence. She proved a rapid student despite obvious distress, her frustration manifesting in low growls and agitated pacing. "This feels wrong," she said, her claws extending before she forced them to retract. "Every instinct says deception endangers pack cohesion. You're protecting yourself, not endangering a pack. We are alone. There is no pack structure to maintain." "Exactly, so the old rules don't apply." Shira made that sound in her chest, confusion wrapped in something deeper. Her tail lashed once before she stilled it with visible effort. On the 5th night, Jacob woke to a sharp yelp. Shira thrashed against the bulkhead, her breathing rapid, her ears pinned flat. He recognized a nightmare, but didn't touch her, uncertain of Valari contact protocols. Instead, he moved to the viewport and pulled up security feeds, his presence steady. After several minutes, Shira's breathing normalized. She uncurled slowly, her amber eyes finding him in the dim light. "Pack loss dreams," she said quietly. "When Valari separate from birth packs, we experience disconnection. This is different. This is choosing to remain outside pack structures." Jacob kept his attention on the security feeds. "Does talking help?" "I don't know. To admit pack loss vulnerability is to admit weakness. I'm not pack, so you're not admitting anything within hierarchy structures." Shira's ears swiveled forward. She moved closer, settling against the adjacent bulkhead where she could see the feeds over his shoulder. Her proximity carried warmth and that pine earth scent. "You are kind," she said after a long silence. "This is unexpected." The raiders hit on the 6th day. 3 ships appeared too fast for legitimate salvage work, weapons already hot. Evacuation alarms screamed as explosions rocked the depot's outer hull. Jacob grabbed their supply pack while Shira shifted instantly to combat readiness. Hackles raised, ears forward, claws extended. They ran toward the docking bays. A freighter captain shouted orders near Bay 7, a compact woman with silver hair and weathered features. 2 raiders breached the far entrance, weapons tracking toward her ship. Shira moved before Jacob could formulate a plan. She crossed the distance with predatory speed, her claws finding the first raider's throat before he could fire. Jacob's shot took the second raider in the chest. The freighter captain, Vasquez, her flight suit said, assessed them with sharp brown eyes. "You just saved my ship," she said. Her tone suggested obligation rather than gratitude. "I don't like owing people. Where are you headed?" "Anywhere contested space touches the fringe territories," Jacob said. Vasquez studied them both, her gaze lingering on Shira's Valari features. "That's expensive real estate for fugitives." She gestured toward her ship. "Get aboard before I reconsider." The broken compass was a battered freighter that looked like it had survived more repairs than original construction. Vasquez ran a crew of 6 who asked no questions. Jacob and Shira received a storage compartment converted to crew quarters, cramped but secure. Days aboard blurred into routine. Jacob monitored communication channels while Shira explored the vessel with Scout's thoroughness, mapping every corridor and emergency exit. But Jacob noticed her attention shifting. She watched him now in ways that transcended tactical assessment. Her ears tracked his movements, even when she appeared focused elsewhere. Her nostrils flared when he entered a room, processing his scent with obvious concentration. When he spoke, her tail movements responded to his tone rather than his words. One evening, he found her alone in the cargo bay. She sat against a container, grooming her cyan fur with agitated motions, her claws dragging through the longer growth around her neck. Her ears lay flat, and her tail lashed in sharp arcs. Jacob approached slowly, making his footsteps audible. She looked up, her amber eyes too bright, her breathing uneven. "I don't understand what you are to me," she said, the words emerging in a rush. "Everything my pack mothers taught me says trust belongs only within pack structures. Loyalty flows through kinship bonds. Sacrifice happens for blood siblings or pack leaders who earn it through hierarchy. But you intervened when I was not yours. You protected me without obligation. You've done more for me than many pack siblings did during my entire youth, and I don't know how to categorize that. I don't know what you are, if not pack." Jacob sat down across from her, maintaining careful distance. "Maybe I don't need to be categorized," he said quietly. "That is terrifying, because if you exist outside my understanding of bonds, then my entire framework for trust is insufficient." She made that sound in her chest, deeper now, more raw. "And if you can be trusted despite being not pack, then perhaps there are forms of connection my species deliberately limits because they threaten pack cohesion." Jacob's datapad chimed. He glanced at the screen, and his expression hardened. "Dr. Navarro responded to my inquiry about Valari psychology. He's on a research station 3 jumps from here." He looked at Shira. "He might help us understand what you're experiencing." "You sought information to help me?" "Yes." Shira's tail stilled completely. Her ears lifted slightly, and her head tilted in a gesture Jacob was learning meant profound confusion. "You invest effort in my well-being. This is not tactical necessity, this is care." Is that so hard to believe? Yes. The word came out barely above a whisper. Because I don't know how to reciprocate outside pack protocols. Jacob stood and offered his hand, palm up, non-threatening. After a long moment, Shira reached out and placed her palm against his. Her pads were surprisingly soft, her claws carefully retracted. The warmth of her touch felt like a promise neither of them had words for yet. 3 days later, they reached Navarro's coordinates. The research station appeared on their sensors, its profile matching the description perfectly. Vasquez frowned at her console. Something's wrong. That station's running way above normal power consumption. Or it's a trap, Jacob said. The broken compass dropped out of approach vector, but too late. 6 Valari pursuit craft uncloaked around them, weapons hot, and a transmission cut through their comms. A large male Valari filled the screen, dark gray fur streaked with silver, battle scars across his muzzle, one ear torn. His voice carried absolute authority wrapped in growling dominance. Shira of the Northern Range, he said in their native tongue. You have brought shame to your pack line through association with human contamination. I am pack leader Thornfang of the High Pack's Enforcement Division. You will surrender immediately, or we will destroy all vessels in this sector. Shira's ears flattened completely against her skull. Her tail tucked tight, and her entire body language shifted to submission responses Jacob had never seen from her. He's going to kill us both, she whispered, and Dr. Navarro betrayed us. Jacob's hand found hers, and her claws wrapped around his fingers with desperate strength. Outside the viewport, the Valari ships formed a perfect tactical encirclement. They were trapped. Thornfang's boarding party moved with pack efficiency. 6 Valari warriors swept through the broken compass in coordinated formation, their weapons trained on vital points, while Vasquez's crew wisely kept their hands visible. Jacob felt the stun blast hit him center mass, his muscles seizing as voltage overwhelmed his nervous system. And the last thing he saw before consciousness faded was Shira being dragged backward by 2 warriors while her amber eyes locked on his with something between terror and rage. He woke in a holding cell, his wrists bound with neural inhibitors that sent painful feedback through his arms whenever he moved. The cell's walls were bare metal, and a single viewport showed the interior of a Valari military transport. Through the transparent barrier, he could see Thornfang speaking with another warrior, their voices too muffled to distinguish words, but their body language radiating authority and purpose. Shira was nowhere visible. Hours passed. Jacob tested the inhibitors systematically, mapping their response patterns, cataloging the pain thresholds. The transport's engines hummed with steady acceleration, carrying them deeper into Valari-controlled space, where human diplomatic protocols meant nothing. Thornfang finally entered, his massive frame filling the narrow corridor beyond the viewport. He studied Jacob with cold assessment, his torn ear twitching slightly. You corrupted her, Thornfang said in heavily accented standard. His voice carried the growling undertones of Valari speech, but his words were carefully chosen. Shira was a promising scout, pack loyal, disciplined. Then you inserted yourself into her execution, and now she exhibits behaviors inconsistent with proper pack hierarchy. I saved her life, Jacob said. You contaminated her social structure. She began questioning pack authority, seeking your approval rather than her pack leader's guidance. Thornfang's lips pulled back slightly, revealing sharp teeth. The High Pack has authorized her termination after she provides testimony against your conspiracy. You will be returned to Ambassador Resch for public trial. Both deaths will restore proper order. There is no conspiracy. Your own smugglers framed her. Irrelevant. She is compromised. You are the contamination vector. Thornfang turned toward the corridor. Dr. Navarro sends his apologies. We made him understand that cooperation preserved his research subjects. Humans are remarkably protective of laboratory animals. The viewport went opaque, leaving Jacob alone in the cell with only the engine vibration and his own breathing for company. Somewhere else on this transport, Shira faced her own interrogation. Jacob's hands clenched despite the inhibitor pain, his mind racing through escape scenarios and finding each one ending in plasma fire. But Shira wasn't in an interrogation room. She hung suspended in a neural suppression cell designed specifically for Valari physiology. The device flooded her senses with overwhelming input, conflicting scent markers, disorienting sound frequencies, lights that strobed at rates that induced submission responses in pack-trained Valari. The system was meant to break her will, reduce her to a compliant state where pack authority could reassert itself without resistance. It should have worked. 3 hours in the suppression cell typically induced complete sensory shutdown and psychological regression to juvenile pack dependence. But Shira had spent weeks learning to control her physiological responses. Jacob had taught her to still her tail despite stress, mask her ear positions despite fear, speak with tones that didn't match her internal state. Those lessons had felt wrong at the time, deception undermining pack honesty, but now she understood their value. She compartmentalized the sensory assault. Let the overwhelming input wash over her conscious mind while maintaining a core of awareness beneath the chaos. Her pack training never prepared her for this kind of cognitive separation, because pack-trained Valari never developed strong individual identity separate from group consciousness. But she wasn't pack-trained anymore. Jacob had taught her, inadvertently through his own impossible loyalty, that identity could exist outside hierarchical structures. Through the suppression field's chaos, she heard voices in the corridor beyond her cell. Thornfang's distinctive growl, another warrior confirming Jacob's transport to human custody, the casual mention that Jacob would be executed within 72 hours. Shira made her first truly independent choice, not pack-ordered, not survival-driven, not reflexive, chosen. She focused on the cell's locking mechanism. The suppression field overwhelmed most motor control, but her claws were semi-autonomous, vestigial hunting structures with dedicated neural pathways separate from conscious movement. She extended them slowly, fighting through the sensory noise, and began working at the lock's access panel with microscopic movements. It took 4 hours of maintaining cognitive separation, while her body screamed for pack contact, for hierarchy structure, for anything familiar to anchor against the chaos. The lock disengaged with a soft click. Shira emerged from the suppression cell, moving on pure instinct. Her vision tunneled, her hackles raised, and every predatory system her species possessed activated simultaneously. The guards outside her cell turned too slowly. She killed the first one with her claws across his throat. The second got his weapon halfway raised before her teeth found his shoulder, and her weight drove him into the bulkhead. The third managed to trigger an alarm before she broke his arm and left him unconscious. 4 more warriors responded to the alarm. Shira fought with savage efficiency that surprised even her. Movements she'd practiced for pack defense now deployed with lethal intent against her own species. Her training had taught her to protect the pack. But these warriors threatened Jacob, and somewhere in the last weeks, her definition of pack had fundamentally transformed. She found Jacob's holding cell on the transport's 3rd level. Through the viewport, she saw him testing his restraints, his face drawn with pain from the inhibitors. When he looked up and their eyes met, there was no accusation in his expression despite her failure to prevent their capture, only relief. Something fundamental shifted in her chest, a sensation she had no pack vocabulary to describe. Shira tore open the cell controls. The viewport depressurized and Jacob stumbled forward as she disabled his neural inhibitors, with claws that trembled slightly from sustained combat stress. "Can you run?" she asked, her voice rougher than usual, her accent thicker. "Yes." He gripped her shoulder briefly, the touch grounding them both. "How did you—" "Later, we need a ship." They moved through the transport together. Shira's combat instincts mapped the optimal route, while Jacob covered their tactical gaps with stolen weapons. The efficiency of their partnership felt natural now, her speed and his positioning, her predatory awareness and his strategic thinking. They reached the docking bay as reinforcements converged from multiple corridors. Shira grabbed Jacob's arm and pulled him toward a sleek Valari pursuit craft, its systems already running hot from a aborted pre-flight check. Jacob took the pilot controls while Shira sealed the airlock behind them. The craft launched with bone-jarring acceleration as plasma fire scored their hull, but Jacob's fingers danced across the navigation systems with practiced precision, calculating a jump to an unmapped system that wouldn't appear in either government's databases. The stars stretched and folded around them as they entered the jump, and when they emerged into normal space 3 days of drift time later, they were alone in a system containing nothing but a dying star and asteroid debris. Jacob treated Shira's injuries in silence: claw marks from warrior combat, plasma burns from near misses, exhaustion that went deeper than physical fatigue. She sat motionless while he worked, her ears drooped, her tail wrapped tight around her legs. "What are you afraid of?" he asked finally, his hands gentle on a burned section of her shoulder. Shira didn't answer immediately. Her claws extended and retracted unconsciously, her breathing shallow. When she finally spoke, her voice emerged barely above a whine. "You saw what I become when truly unleashed. Not the careful scout, not the disciplined warrior, but something primal, something that kills its own species without hesitation." Her ears flattened completely. "My entire identity is built on pack structures that are dissolving. I am becoming something I don't recognize, and I fear you will see me as monstrous rather than worthy." Jacob set down the medical supplies. He reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement so she could refuse, and when his hand settled carefully on her shoulder, his palm warm through her fur, Shira felt the gesture bypass every pack protocol she'd ever learned. "I saw you fight for someone you chose to protect," Jacob said quietly. "I saw you make decisions based on what you believed was right, not what you were ordered to do. That's not monstrous. That's courage." Shira leaned into the touch with a soft, vulnerable sound she'd never made before. Not a pack submission whimper, not a dominance challenge, but something entirely new. A sound that spoke of trust given freely rather than earned through hierarchy. "I don't know what I'm becoming," she whispered. "Without pack structure, I don't know who I am. Maybe that's not a loss, maybe that's freedom." Shira's tail uncurled slightly. She turned her head to look at him directly, her amber eyes bright in the ship's dim lighting. "You stayed with me," she said, "even when I couldn't save you from capture, even when I failed." "You didn't fail. You escaped an impossible situation and came back for me." Jakob's thumb traced a gentle line across her shoulder. "That's not failure. That's choosing someone." The words settled between them like a physical presence. Shira pressed her forehead against Jacob's chest, a Valari gesture of ultimate trust, offered outside pack bonds for perhaps the first time in her life. Jacob's arms came up to hold her carefully, and in that embrace was everything her species tried to restrict to bloodkin: trust, hope, belonging. The beginning of something neither of them had language for yet, but both recognized as worth every sacrifice it demanded. Outside the viewport, the dying star cast amber light across the asteroid field, and for the first time since Threshold Station, they were safe. Fragile, but safe. And that was enough. The encrypted message arrived on their third day adrift. Captain Vasquez's voice crackled through their damaged communications array with characteristic bluntness. "Steele, I did some digging after Thornfang boarded my ship. Found evidence linking your mining executive to a weapons network spanning both governments. High-level officials on both sides profiting from the smuggling operation you two stumbled into." A pause, then her tone shifted. "The Fringe Accord reviewed my data. They'll grant you asylum if you survive long enough to testify. Coordinates attached. Move fast. Everyone knows you escaped, and they're all coming for you." Jacob pulled up the navigation data while Shira studied the star charts with Scout's precision. The Fringe Accord's border station sat at the intersection of 3 contested territories, technically neutral, but practically lawless. Getting there required crossing directly through patrol zones where both human and Valari forces operated. "It's suicide," Shira said, her ears flat. "We'll be detected the moment we enter mapped space." "Staying here is slower suicide. We've got maybe a week before life support fails completely." Jacob met her eyes. "We run the border, full burn, and hope Vasquez can provide cover." Shira's tail lashed once, then stilled. She nodded. They jumped back into mapped space 12 hours later, their stolen Valari craft immediately triggering proximity alerts across multiple sensor networks. Jacob pushed the engines beyond safe parameters, while Shira monitored pursuit patterns, her claws tapping against the console with unconscious anxiety. Thornfang's pack hunters appeared first, 4 pursuit craft dropping out of stealth with weapons already tracking. The broken compass materialized seconds later, Vasquez's freighter positioning itself between the Fugitives and the Valari formation while her guns opened fire. "Go," Vasquez's voice cut through the comms. "I'll buy you time." But Ambassador Resch's kill squad arrived from the opposite vector, 3 human interceptors with military-grade weapons that turned the space around them into a maze of plasma fire and evasive trajectories. Jacob dove through the chaos while Shira called out threat positions, her voice steady despite the terror evident in her body language. The Fringe Accord station appeared on their sensors, its defensive perimeter tantalizingly close. Jacob adjusted course, angling for the docking approach, when their ship's bioscan suddenly screamed a warning. "Something's on the hull," Shira said, her hackles rising. "Large, moving toward the maintenance hatch." Jacob pulled up external cameras, and his blood froze. The xenomorph clung to their hull with biomechanical claws, its elongated head tilted as though listening to the vibrations inside the ship. Somehow it had survived Threshold Station, tracked them across systems, and now it prepared to breach their vessel. "It followed our jump signature," Jacob breathed. "It's been hunting us this entire time." Thornfang's weapons fire struck their port side, breaching the secondary power systems. Alarms shrieked as life support began failing, and the ship started losing attitude control. The xenomorph tore through the maintenance hatch with horrifying strength, its inner jaw extending as it pulled itself into the lower deck. Jacob fought the controls while debris pinned his left leg against the console. Pain shot through him as structural support gave way, trapping him completely. Their trajectory degraded rapidly, the ship tumbling toward the station but no longer on any viable docking vector. Shira looked at the controls, then at Jacob, then at the emergency pod embedded in the bulkhead behind them. Her ears swiveled between sounds. The xenomorph climbing toward the cockpit, the hull breaching under continued weapons fire, Jacob's trapped breathing. Mathematics made the choice simple. She could complete the docking sequence alone and save herself, or attempt a rescue that would likely kill them both while the xenomorph breached their position within seconds. Every pack structure she'd ever known said self-preservation came first. The pack survives through individual sacrifice when necessary, but throwing 2 lives away for sentiment was weakness. Shira moved without hesitation. She grabbed Jacob's shoulders and pulled with desperate strength, her claws extending for purchase, her digitigrade legs providing explosive force against the deck. The debris shifted, and Jacob came free with a pained grunt. Shira dragged him toward the emergency pod, while behind them the cockpit door buckled under the xenomorph's assault. She sealed them both into the cramped pod, her body pressed against Jacob's as she initiated launch. Through the viewport, she saw the xenomorph erupt into the cockpit, its eyeless face turning toward them, but her hand was already slamming the manual release. The pod launched with violent acceleration. Behind them, automated defense systems identified their damaged ship as a threat and opened fire, the resulting explosion consuming both the vessel and the creature within it in a bloom of plasma and debris. The pod tumbled through the Fringe Accord's docking bay entrance with seconds to spare, its damaged heat shields barely functional, and they crashed into the landing area hard enough that Jacob's vision went dark at the edges. When consciousness returned, he found himself in a medical bay, clean white walls and the soft hum of monitoring equipment. The first thing he saw was Shira's face above him, her amber eyes bright with relief, her ears forward in alert concern, and her tail wagging slightly, an unconscious expression of joy she couldn't suppress. "You're awake," she said, her voice carrying warmth that transcended translation. Jacob reached up slowly and touched her muzzle, his fingers gentle against her fur. Shira leaned into the contact, her eyes closing briefly. "You chose me," he said quietly, "over survival, over logic." "Yes, no hesitation, no doubt. This is my pack now, pack of 2, chosen, not inherited." The Fringe Accord granted them asylum 3 days later. Vasquez's evidence initiated legal proceedings against officials in both governments, and the political fallout promised to reshape human-Volari relations for decades. But Jacob and Shira remained isolated in their small quarters, aware that sanctuary came with its own costs. The message from the Volari High Pack arrived on the 7th day, formal, cold, final. Shira read it twice, her ears drooping with each word. Jacob watched as she processed her formal exile, stripped of all pack structures, declared bondless and unworthy of tribal markings or ancestral names. In Volari culture, she had ceased to exist. He found her at an observation port, staring at distant stars, her posture tense and her tail wrapped tight around her legs. The station's ambient lighting cast her cyan fur in pale relief. "Do you regret it?" Jacob asked, approaching slowly. "Your choice?" Shira turned to face him fully. Her amber eyes held no tears. Volari didn't cry, but the weight of loss showed in every line of her body. "My people believe pack bonds are the only bonds that matter," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion beneath. "That loyalty without kinship is impossible. That trust requires blood connection or hierarchical obligation." She took a step closer. "But I have learned that choosing to protect someone despite having no obligation requires a courage my pack training could never provide. Choosing someone freely, without duty or hierarchy demanding it, that is strength my species fears because it threatens pack cohesion." Jacob stepped closer, close enough that she could scent him clearly. His warmth, his determination, his steady presence. "So what comes next?" he asked softly. Shira's answer wasn't spoken in words. She closed the distance between them and pressed against him in full-body contact, her forehead against his chest, her arms wrapping around his waist, her tail curving around his leg. Jacob's arms came up to hold her carefully, his chin resting against the top of her head, and in that embrace was everything her species tried to restrict to bloodkin. Trust, hope, belonging. "What comes next," Shira said, her voice muffled against his chest, "is we find out together, pack of two." "Pack of two," Jacob repeated, his arms tightening slightly. Outside the observation port, ships moved through the darkness between stars, carrying trade and conflict, diplomacy and war. The universe continued its vast, indifferent rotation, humans and Volari pursuing their ancient patterns of alliance and opposition. But in this small space, on this neutral station, two fugitives held each other and created something neither government sanctioned nor culture predicted. Something built on choice rather than birth, on courage rather than obligation. A pack of two, forged in fire and flight, bound by nothing except the decision to stay. And that was stronger than any blood bond could ever be. The station's lights dimmed for night cycle, and they remained there together, watching stars wheel past the viewport, neither speaking because no words could improve the moment. They had survived, they had chosen each other, and whatever came next they would face it together. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. And that made all the difference.